There is a secret library under my school. It operates under a strict set of rules. I'd always thought the rules of my high school library were too strict, but that was before. Derek had spent the whole week telling me about this mysterious trapdoor hidden behind the gym. Josh, tonight at 10 p.m. Sarah and I are going to explore what's behind that trapdoor. Are you with us? He asked me as he and Sarah sat down at the table where I'd set up to study. I glanced incongruously at Sarah, who was standing next to Derek with a big smile on her face. Sarah, seriously, he got you into this? I whispered so the library supervisor wouldn't yell at us. Doesn't it intrigue you? I want to know what they're hiding there. Besides, what's the risk? Teachers don't go round the gym at night, she replied. I leaned back in my chair to think. Derek was a notorious troublemaker, Sarah wasn't, but she was starting to follow him a bit too much for my taste. I'd been friends with Derek since grade school, so I knew he wasn't dangerous. But imagining Sarah alone with him, who knows what trouble his impulsiveness would bring them? All right, I'm in, I said. They cheered a little too loudly, which earned us a remark from the librarian supervisor. I'd come with them first and foremost to make sure they wouldn't get into trouble. But I must admit, I was also curious, like them, about what we'd find. That evening we found ourselves at the spot Derek had pointed out to me on Google Maps. The three of us were standing in front of the mysterious trapdoor, equipped with nothing more than a flashlight each, bought at the corner store for the occasion. Derek smoked a cigarette absent-mindedly. So that's it, I said, examining it. It was strange, to be honest. It had obviously been concealed by vegetation and vines were still attached to the metal handle. It was thick and perfectly smooth, apart from that there was no indication of what might be behind it. The three of us set about lifting the trapdoor. Once on its side, we pointed our torches inside. A stone staircase stretched so far into the darkness that even our lights couldn't reach the end. It goes in the direction of the school, said Sarah. Do you think it allows access like a secret passage? Maybe, I replied. Or maybe there's an old bunker down there that the school was built on. Derek stepped onto the stairs and looked at us, smiling. Only one way to find out, let's go. And with that, we headed down the tunnel. The walls of the tunnel were made of stone and looked solid, apart from a few water seepages here and there. We walked down for a good 15 minutes before the stairs stopped and a corridor went straight ahead. We kept walking. The light-hearted chatter of the beginning gradually dissipated, leaving only a heavy silence. You'd better not be claustrophobic, said Sarah, peering into the darkness behind us. It's true that we'd been walking for a good 10 minutes now and it was getting worrying. We didn't know where we were going and all it took was a rockfall and we'd end up buried alive. Hey, I see something, said Derek while I was lost in thought. He was right, there was finally a structure in front of us. We ran the rest of the distance to it, excited to have finally found something. What the fuck is that? Said Derek loudly once we got to the front. I came up behind him with Sarah to discover the object of his confusion. It was a simple wooden door with writing carved into the wood. Library rules. I read aloud. The library? Seriously, we came all this way for this? To find the school library's book stash? Talk about a find. Derek said with a dejected look. No, wait, I replied. Look what it says underneath. I know the school library well, and I've never seen these rules anywhere. The rules inscribed were as follows. Rule N Degree 1. Any student entering the library must work there for at least 1 hour. Rule N Degree 2. It is forbidden to damage books in any way. Rule N Degree 3. Borrowed books must be returned to the place where they were taken. Rule N Degree 4. Be quiet. Rule N Degree 5. It's forbidden to look the librarian in the eye. What the fuck, why couldn't we look the librarian in the eye? Asked Derek. Maybe the one who worked here was shy. Replied Sarah. The three of us looked at each other warily. Shall we go in? I finally offered, to Derek's surprise. I was ready to get the hell out, but since for once you're taking the initiative, after you, Derek replied, waving me in. I grabbed the door handle. For a moment, I wondered if I was making a mistake. I was supposed to be the voice of reason in the group, but in the end, I wasn't as reasonable as I thought when it came to something that interested me. The door opened with a creak that would wake the dead. We pointed our 3 flashlights cautiously inside before entering. "Hello?" I said instinctively. "Seriously?" said Sarah, raising her eyebrows. I admitted, the place clearly hadn't seen a living being in a very long time. A long, low-ceilinged room stretched out before us. The stone walls were now hidden behind rows of shelves full of dusty books. Even our footsteps inside raised the dust that had accumulated on the floor for decades, or perhaps even longer. There were also shelves in the middle of the room, creating 4 corridors. We split up to explore a little on our own with our flashlights. I moved to a shelf on my right and began to run my finger along the edges of the books, reading their titles as I went. Despite the time I'd spent in the real high school library, I didn't recognize any of the authors or titles. They all seemed esoteric. The recurring themes were divinatory art, alchemy, astrology, ceremonial magic, and satanic rituals. "Hey, look at this," Derek said to the row on the other side of mine. He showed me the cover of the book he was holding, The Art and Usage of Human Sacrifice. "Not likely they'll teach us that in high school," he said, laughing and setting the book on top of several others. Derek put it back. I started to say before he went any further, but it was too late. "Bad boy," said a female voice that sounded ancestral. What looked like an old woman emerged from the shadows just behind Derek. She was at least 6 feet 5 inches tall, her long, dirty gray hair falling to her bare feet with their yellow, damaged nails. She wore a drab gray dress and her face. Her face was skeletal, to the point where the dry skin stretched over her features looked as if it might break at any moment. Her bulging, lidless eyes stared at Derek with frightening intensity. He began to turn to look at her. "Don't look back," I said eagerly, fear reducing my voice to a whisper. Suddenly her gaze landed on me and I instantly looked Derek in the eye, my whole body shaking. She turned her attention back to him, gently grabbed the hand he'd used to pick up the book, and in one swift motion, she snapped 2 of his fingers. Derek screamed at the top of his lungs. Quiet in the library, the thing screamed at the back of his neck aggressively. Derek held back his scream in tears, biting his lips. We just stood there. Meanwhile, Sarah had returned to us and was staring at her feet, tears running down her eyelids and falling onto her shoes, making little noises in the absolute silence. Eventually, the thing, which was obviously what the list of rules referred to as the librarian, went further back. We rejoined at the other end of the shelf. "Let's get the fuck out of here," I whispered to them. They both nodded silently and we quietly made our way to the library door. As Derek held his aching hand and Sarah stood beside him to help, I gently grasped and lowered the door handle before pulling it gently towards me. The door wouldn't budge. What's happening?" asked Sarah. "It's stuck, I can't open it." "Force it harder." I pulled with all my weight. "I'm trying but it won't open," I whispered anxiously. Then I remembered. Fuck, rule number 1. Any student entering the library must work there for at least 1 hour. We were stuck here. We heard the old woman's footsteps coming towards us this time. "Back to work, unless you want to be punished," she said menacingly. Trembling like leaves, the 3 of us slowly made our way to a bookshelf together. "We have to work, take a book, it doesn't matter which one," I whispered. We each took a book at random, but all 3 of us beside each other to make sure we didn't forget where to put them down. Who knows what she'd do to us if one of us repeated the mistake? This time she wouldn't just break our fingers. "What the hell is that thing? You're not going to tell me it's a human being?" whispered Derek as we made our way to tables spread out in the middle of the library. "And have you seen these books?" I replied. "They look like they're hundreds of years old. Sometimes the titles aren't even in English." "What's this room doing below the school? Do you think they know about it?" asked Sarah. "No way," I replied. "This place. We're probably the only ones who've set foot in here in a long time. We've got to get out of here," Derek said as we arrived in front of the tables. "There's nothing to tell us that another one of these things won't fall on us and kill us just for the fun of it." He was right. We'd only just discovered this place. We still had no idea of the dangers that could be lurking here in addition to this old woman. We had to stay focused. We had 1 hour to stay here, hoping that the door would open by itself at the end of that hour, which wasn't even certain. The three of us sat down at individual tables, making as little noise as possible. Each table was equipped with a pencil and a few dull sheets of paper. The old woman patrolled around us like a ghoul, ready to descend on us at the slightest misstep. I finally turned my eyes to the large book I'd borrowed. I'd just been careful to take one that was written in English so I wouldn't have to risk pretending to read and get punished by the thing around us. I read the title on the cover, Ritualistic Incantations, Summoning Demons and Gods. What the fuck, I told myself. I looked at Derek and Sarah, who were also immersed in their forced reading for the next hour. I opened it to the first page and began to scan the contents with my flashlight. The contents were as frightening as the title. It contained precise and comprehensive instructions for, if the book was to be believed, summoning demonic creatures and imposing one's will on them to perform a task. Often murder, but they could also be summoned to inflict illness, bad luck, nightmares, and other evils. The list of ingredients and the acts to be committed to carry out the invocations ran to several pages each time. I didn't recognize half the ingredients, and each invocation required the sacrifice of at least one or more animals. Some invocations, like that of a being called Irinwi, even required the sacrifice of one of your own children. The sound of a drop of water hitting a surface woke me up. Without thinking about it, I'd been so drawn into reading the book that I'd forgotten everything around me. I shook my head, a strange feeling of dizziness still present in my mind, and turned my head and my flashlight to my right towards the source of the sound. Sarah. Blood flowed from her wide-open eyes, fixed on the book in her hand. Drop after drop of blood fell onto the page in front of her, and as if by magic, words appeared as the blood fed the page. I was stunned. There was nothing I could do to help her. Then I heard the violent sound of paper being filled in with pencil. I slowly turned my head to my left. Derek was staring at the book in front of him and was filling whole pages with strange symbols, as if he was taking notes. Diake? No answer. He seemed possessed. I was about to turn around to face him when I caught sight of her. The old woman was standing right in front of me, staring at me with her lidless eyes just 2 inches from my face. I stiffened and immediately looked down at my book. Despite the fact that I was pointing my flashlight downwards, I could feel her, still in front of me. Motionless in the shadows, like a predator ready to pounce on its prey. I skimmed the pages for interminable seconds, the sweat from my forehead collecting on my eyebrows. "Quiet," she whispered in my ear in her raspy voice, before finally pulling away. I was stunned, my eyes fixed on the pages in front of me. How long had we been standing there? I could have tried looking at the time on my phone, which was still in my pocket, but considering the normal library rules forbidding the use of phones, I didn't want to take the risk. I kept turning the pages, trying to read only diagonally. This book, like Derek and Sarah's, wasn't normal. I felt it had a hold on me. Every page I turned seemed to create a louder and louder buzz in my head that also blurred my vision. It was almost hard to read. The section on summoning gods was an unspeakable horror. Images of oceans of corpses were used to illustrate the necessary sacrifices. Thousands of men, women, and children thrown into chasms or butchered at the same time just so you could ask a question of one of these gods whose existence I didn't even know. I finally reached the last page, a blank page. I had the sensation that my brain was being sucked into the page. Ink appeared, forming a sentence, "Invocation Joe." Meinin. No. I whispered. As I stared at the page, a sound echoed through the room. The unmistakable tinkle of a bell. The hour was up. An excruciating roar remained in my mind, making me dizzy. The next moment, whispers reached my ears. I raised my head and it was as if the shadows all around us had come to life. as if the library itself had come to life. I could see strange shadows moving from shelf to shelf, whispering, reading a book they held in their incorporeal hands. "Guys, we need to go." I looked toward Sarah. Her eyes were bloodshot and she looked pale as a ghost. Her hands were blood-stained and a significant amount of her blood was now soaking her pants. Still, tears of blood continued to fall from her eyes. I was afraid she wouldn't even have the strength to get up and run away. Derek was still tirelessly writing symbols one on top of the other on pages that had already been filled, his eyes blank, his arm trembling from the sustained effort. It was as if he were possessed by something stronger than himself. I approached him and shook his shoulders until a glimmer of consciousness reappeared in him. He looked at me with a bewildered expression as if I'd just woken him up from a dream. "Derek, you okay? We need to leave, man." "But the hour, we need to stay more." "No, the bell rang, I'm sure it means an hour has passed, get up, we need to go, man." I helped him to his feet, my temples hurting like hell, and while all around us the shadows began to get excited and gradually close in on our circle of light. Once he was on his feet, I went over to Sarah. When I touched her shoulder, she turned her head towards me and looked at me as if she didn't recognize me. She could hardly see me with all the blood still clotting in her eyes. I managed to get her to stand up and follow me. She held on to my hand as if lost alone in the dark. Slowly we headed back towards the exit, holding our respective books in our hands. "You guys okay?" whispered Sarah, rubbing her eyes to see better. "I'm fine," replied Derek, "just still a bit confused. I'm seeing symbols in front of my eyes, but it feels like it's passing." None of us wanted to talk about what we'd read, as if we were aware that it was already too much to have read just one. I remained silent. I was absolutely not fucking okay. They were so confused that none of them had seen the misty shapes clustering around us with a curious air, like a pack of lions watching 3 rabbits pass by. Their whispering became more and more intense. I could make out some of the words, "Stay, come with us, you look delicious, I want to be inside your skin, sacrifices." We all put our books away in front of the shelf where we'd picked them up. The exit was barely 20 feet away. With a dust-raising creak, it opened on its own. The buzzing in my head began to turn into murmurs, telling me to stay, to turn back. I could no longer move forward on my own, as if my will was gradually slipping away. Sarah and Derek each had to take me by the arm to force me forward, while my whole body, against my will, was forcing me in the opposite direction. "Dude, what's wrong with you? We gotta go." I struggled with all my might to make my body obey while my friends struggled with all their might against the entity that had taken hold of me here. Was it something in the book? My vision blurred. I began to wobble on my legs. Black dots were beginning to form at the corners of my eyes. "It was winning." "No," shouted Derek. And in one fell swoop the 3 of us were hurled through the open doorway. We stumbled to the floor and the door slammed shut behind us. Instantly my mind cleared as if cleansed of the presence of this unknown entity. I looked at Derek and Sarah, who also looked much better. We were saved. We made our way back in silence and split up to go our separate ways once we got out, after assuring each other that we were fit enough for it. A week later we returned to the trap door, but not to enter it this time. Derek installed a sturdy padlock and I put up a "danger" sign in front to ward off the curious. Let's hope it's enough. To this day, I still have no idea where this room comes from or why it's there. I only hope that the knowledge it contains remains buried there forever.